Now look, there are plenty of new and updated naked motorcycles on the market for 2025, but which ones are actually worth buying? Well, in this video we'll go through 14 of the best and we'll go in price order ascending. So of course, starting at the lower end of the pricing spectrum, we've got the Aprilia Tuono 457, which is brand new for this year and follows on a course from the RS 457, which was launched a year or two back. Naturally, the spec is pretty similar and I'd say fairly impressive for an A2 compatible bike. With an aluminium frame, you'd normally find steel at this sort of price point, sporty suspension and brakes, and a decent tech package, so 3 riding modes, adjustable traction control, a quick shifter, and a full-colour 5-inch TFT display. But I think more than any of that stuff, my favourite thing about this bike, despite the fact that it's mid-capacity, a parallel twin, is that it gets a 270-degree crank, which gives it much more character and feel, versus the other parallel twins on the market, like the Honda 500s, which get the much more agricultural sounding 180-degree crank. I certainly enjoyed riding the RS 457 a couple of months back, so I fully expect this one to be every bit as good, just with that more versatile and comfortable naked riding position. Roughly £1,000 more though will get you a real spicy meatball, and it's in the form of the Honda CB750 Hornet. This bike has been a hot seller since its introduction in 2023, and for good reason. It's got this lively, playful engine that makes about 90 horsepower peak, which just has a bit more entertainment than some of the already quite accomplished competition. But I think more than that, it had to be the price. It came in at just £6,999 when it was launched, and so it substantially undercut any other bike in that middleweight affordable naked bike segment, despite being more powerful, having better chassis components, and also a bit more tech. Now, admittedly, the price has crept up a couple of £100 since then, and prices are yet to be confirmed again for 2025, but as you can see from its position on the list, we're still expecting it to be the most affordable of that 600 to 800 capacity bunch. On top of that, for 2025, they have addressed one of the main gripes that people had with the first iteration, and that's that it used to have the same headlight as what might be perceived to be a lesser bike in the CB500. Now, it's got its own identity with a dedicated headlight for this and the 750 Transalp. And they've also taken the opportunity to play with the suspension settings, so they say a little more damping on both the fork and shock, which gives it a bit more of a sporty ride, especially when braking from high speeds. Another big seller in this segment though comes from Triumph, and that's the Trident 660, which is also an absolutely cracking bike. Perhaps it's not quite as affordable as the Honda, but I think plenty of people will be willing to pay that little bit extra for the more original looks and the fact that you get a triple cylinder engine in a market absolutely full of parallel twins. So yeah, it already had a pretty strong USP, but for 2025, Triumph have also given it a bit of a boost in the tech department with lots of equipment now fitted as standard. Firstly, there's a new sports riding mode that joins the existing rain and road, so there should be a bit more snap on the throttle, and they've also fitted an IMU, which gives it lean sensitive traction control and ABS. Then you've got cruise control, a quick shifter, and their Bluetooth connectivity unit, all fitted as standard now, and so for the money, it really does look hard to beat and offers something a bit more refined when you set it against that Honda. Also refreshed for 2025 though is another key competitor amongst these middleweights, and that's the MT-07 from Yamaha, which previous to the introduction of the Hornet and the Trident pretty much dominated this market. The CP2 engine is bags of fun, especially when you pair it with the relatively lightweight chassis, but it has to be said the new bikes were offering much better suspension, better brakes, and also more comprehensive tech packages. But look, all 3 of those areas for 2025 have been upgraded on this new bike, so you've got stuff like a new upside-down fork, radially mounted 4-piston brake calipers, and a ride-by-wire throttle that opens up modern-day riding modes and ride arrays which were previously absent from the MT-07. So yeah, it's now looking, I'd say, at least competitive, if not outstanding in one key area, but it does have a bit of an ace up its sleeve, and that's the fact that you can get it fitted with their AMT or automated manual transmission. This means for a few £100 extra, you can ride it in an automatic mode, which completely does away with having to operate the clutch or shifter, or you can put it in manual mode and choose the gears yourself with the plus and minus buttons on the switchgear. I think the most interesting thing about it though is this sort of tech has previously been the preserve of more expensive and premium bikes, and I think this is the first instance where it's been available on a bike that's under £10,000. So of course, if convenience and ease of use are high on your list, but you're on a relatively constrained budget, then certainly the MT-07 is on the must demo list for 2025. That all said though, the bike that I think is going to absolutely dominate in terms of naked bike sales in the new model year has to be the new CB1000 Hornet from Honda and the upspec'd SP version. Its place on the list at number 5 of 14 should be some indication of just how good value it is at £8,999 for the standard bike and just £1,000 more for the fancy brakes and suspension of the SP. For that sort of price, you're getting absolutely unparalleled levels of performance with a Fireblade-derived inline-4 engine that makes 150 horsepower peak. And on that SP version, you've got such a well-spec'd chassis with the Brembo-style Lemma brake calipers and the Öhlins shock at the rear. Then, the tech has pretty much everything you could need in terms of settings and safety, apart from maybe lean-sensitive rider aids and perhaps cruise control. But I think when you consider the price and how good it looks as well, that I can't see this one being anything else but a brilliant seller for Honda in 2025. Now, before we get onto the next bike, I just want to say a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Camoto. Their motorcycle navigation app uses their own dedicated in-house algorithm that's specifically built for bikes, so you can seek out the best biking roads in your area and never have to ride a dull one again. I use it when I'm in a new location to find the best possible roads, but also equally use it when I'm back home to mix up my regular routes and keep things a little bit fresh. It's super simple to use with a whole host of brilliant features, and so I thoroughly recommend checking out the link down in the description below to find out more. And you'll also find down there a code for a free trial and another code for a discount if you do decide to take out one of their premium memberships. So once again, a massive thanks to Camoto for their support and for making videos like this one possible. Now next up, we've got the F900R from BMW, which broadly looks like the same bike versus the previous generation, at least externally anyway. But actually, under the covers, it's got some important new tweaks which I think are exactly what it needed. You see, on paper, this bike, the previous generation, should have been good fun. It had a strong parallel twin engine, decent components, and also plenty of technology and rider aids. But after borrowing one from BMW a couple of years back, I've got to say, it did leave me feeling a little bit flat. That's why I'm glad to see all of these tweaks and improvements for 2025, including an update to the most sporty, dynamic riding mode for a bit more snap from the engine. The riding position has been canted forward a bit to make it more aggressive. And then also you've got the option now of an Akropovich accessory exhaust to give it some extra snarl. Lighter wheels should also make it a bit more light on its feet. There's a new adjustable fork at the front, so that should help you to get it a bit more dialed. And then with a lightweight battery on board, it's now 3 kilograms lighter in total. So I'm hoping we've now got a bike that has a bit more edge and excitement to the ride. Also around that £9,000 mark though, we've got the Kawasaki Z900 along with the more fancy SE version for about £11,000. Now for an inline-4 that makes about 120 horsepower, it's got decent suspension and brakes plus the up-to-date tech package. You'd normally say about £9,000 feels like decent value for money, and it's a proven performer that's sold pretty well over the years. But then you remember the CB1000 Hornet from Honda that costs less money, makes 30 more horsepower, and gets similar equipment and tech for the 2 levels of spec. It's not just this bike that I think is going to struggle because of the new Hornet. I think the Suzuki GSX S1000 too, they just look difficult to justify now versus the Honda, and so it'll be interesting to see how this update does when they hit dealers for 2025. And that kind of had me thinking that Husqvarna, with the new Vitpilen 801 Sporty Naked, are kind of lucky that they've given it a bit of a different appeal. Technically, it's heavily based upon the KTM 790 Duke, with KTM being part of the same parent company. And so the engine, the chassis spec, the tech are all pretty much identical, which I guess is no bad thing because the 790 Duke is an absolute blast to ride out on the road, and so I'd expect nothing less from this new Vitpilen. The thing that does make it a bit of a tricky sell though is the price. It's expected to come in at around 10.5 grand, and that makes it 2.5 grand more than the 790 Duke, and still 1.5 grand more than the base 1000 Hornet. The thing is though, this bike is largely about style, with that typical minimal Husqvarna design language layered on top of those exciting KTM rudiments, and so it has to be said it makes for a much more, well, in my opinion, visually appealing bike than the KTM. Is it enough though to get it to actually sell some units? Well, I guess this one's in the eye of the beholder, but for me, and you could call me a little bit vain, I do think it's worth the extra money versus the KTM for a bike you actually like to open the garage door to. Also expected to be in roughly the same ballpark is the new Aprilia Tuono 660 factory, which has had a bit of an update here and there for the new model year. Suspension is now top spec with an Öhlins NIX30 fork and an STX46 shock, whilst power has had a little bit of a boost up to 105 horses peak, owing to the use of larger throttle bodies. Launch control is now added to the electronics along with backlit switchgear and a new, bigger TFT display, and so while the previous generation was already very good, this one just sharpened things up a little bit further. Also getting a mild update for 2025 is the BMW S900R, with some new bits and pieces in the electronics package, a bit more power from the engine, so 162 horses up to 167, and a shorter final drive ratio and also a quick turn throttle that should both help to give it a bit more punch under acceleration. The M1000R Super Spec version also gets that new throttle and a couple of new electronics, but the most prominent change to both bikes would have to be the new headlight design, which moves away from the single headlight of the previous gen to a twin headlight that I think does make it look more in keeping with the rest of the lineup, so the RR sports bike equivalents. Personally, I really like it, especially in that very popping blue and yellow paint job, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Now, moving up to the sharp end of the list now, and just under £14,000, we'll get you Ducati's heavily revised Streetfighter V2 with the upspec S version with the Öhlins suspension costing another 2 grand on top. The headline change for these ones might not sound that exciting. They've done away with the Super Quadro V-twin, which made about 150 horsepower, and now fitted it with their new V2 engine, which I think, to the disappointment of many, makes more like 120 horsepower peak. Why? Well, it looks like it's an attempt from Ducati to sort of streamline their range, with this new engine expected to be put to use in a wide range of bikes, so stuff like the Multistrada V2, the Hypermotard, the Monster, the Desert X, and the Super Sport. But it's got to be said, I mean, for those other bikes, it'll be pretty much the same as the Testa Stretta engine, but for this Streetfighter V2 and the Panigale V2, it does make for a little bit of a difficult sell when it comes to the marketing of these new bikes. So is there any sort of silver lining? Well, I guess the big one is that the engine is quite a bit lighter, and they've also put the rest of the bike on a bit of a weight loss program. And so it now comes in as being the lightest street fighter they've ever made at just 175 kilograms, wet with no fuel. I think with this one, if you can look past those headline specs, certainly the power figure, then it should still make for a heck of a road bike, and I'll certainly be trying to get hold of a press bike to try one out. In a similar vein, you could also consider the new KTM 990 Duke R, which follows on from the regular 990 Duke, which was launched earlier this year. There's more power than the standard bike with just shy of 130 horses, there's upgraded suspension, more tech, and also their absolutely massive new 8.8-inch TFT display. So it looks like it should be a bit of a hoot, if only it weren't for the price. You see, in 2023, the 890 Duke R, so the predecessor for this bike, was about 11.5 grand, but given that the standard 990 Duke is now £13,000, well, I guess for this new R model, you'd be looking at about, 15 grand now? We'll have to find out when they fully announce the prices, but again, it's starting to make that £9,999 CB1000 Hornet SP look pretty tempting. Now we're into the properly serious super nakeds though, and one that's been tweaked for 2025 is the Tuono V4 and also the factory version. Peak power goes from 175 horses to 180. The bodywork has been revised for better aerodynamics and heat dissipation. And the electronics have also been updated with new wheelie control and slide control, plus their latest connectivity module. So look, far from a complete overhaul for this one, but it was already one of the most desirable naked bikes on the market, and I fully expect it to continue to be so. Can anything truly match the Ducati Streetfighter V4 though for out-and-out pizzazz? Or at least the previous generation anyway, with the single-sided swing arm. You see, this new 2025 model gets all of the updates from the new Panigale, including the double-sided swing arm, which some Ducati fans have labelled as a bit of an abomination. Ducati aren't afraid to make changes though that are perhaps slightly aesthetically detrimental in the name of performance. You can think back to the new Monster, for example, which dropped the iconic steel trellis frame in order to shave off some kilograms. And so I guess this new Streetfighter V4, along with the Panigale V4 and the Streetfighter V2 and Panigale V2, are just another example, because they say the new swing arm has less rigidity, which provides more grip when the bike is leaned over mid-corner where the suspension is less effective. Just under £23,000 gets you the standard bike, or you can pay another £3,000 for the S model with the semi-active Olin suspension, but quite honestly, either would be totally fine with me. So that rounds off our list of the best new and updated naked motorcycles for 2025, and I'd love to know from you in the comments below which would be your pick. Would you, for example, take that top-spec Ducati? Or does that Hornet SP look way more tempting at less than half the price? Let me know in the comments, and also I'll put on the screen now our rundown of the best new Hondas for 2025, which we shot at Motorcycle Live, so do give that a click and a watch if you haven't already. Hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here from MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.